Every commercial airport on Earth shares a single engineering promise: get you there alive. 13 of them are actively working against that promise, not because of negligence, but because of geography, economics, and a particular kind of human stubbornness that refuses to accept that some places simply cannot have airports. They can, they just shouldn't. Madeira on Easter Island sits so far into the Pacific that its runway is the longest emergency diversion strip in the Southern Hemisphere. There is literally nowhere else to land for thousands of miles. Tenzing Hillary Airport in Lukla, Nepal, holds a steeper approach angle than most aircraft are designed to handle, ends at a cliff, and makes a missed approach geometrically impossible. The runway at Rancho e Arausquin on Saba Island in the Caribbean is 400 meters long, shorter than the takeoff roll of most commercial jets at sea level. These are not engineering failures. They are engineering achievements so extreme that they redefined what achievement means. The ice runway at McMurdo Station in Antarctica is rebuilt from scratch every single year because the frozen ocean it sits on refuses to stay frozen. Madeira's runway was extended over the Atlantic on 180 concrete columns because the island ran out of island. Gibraltar's runway crosses a public road, and that road crosses the runway, and this has been the arrangement since 1939. Each of these 13 locations produced at least one disaster before the current safety protocols were written. Engineers studied the wreckage, rewrote the rules, and the airports stayed open. Pilots still fly in, passengers still board. The engineering mind, it turns out, does not easily accept the word impossible. It negotiates with it. There is exactly one active civilian airport in the world where aircraft must yield to freight trains. Not historically. Right now, on a working runway in a functioning regional airport. That airport is in Gisborne, New Zealand, and it holds the 13th spot on this list for a reason that is as mundane as it is staggering. Gisborne sits on the eastern coast of the North Island, facing the Bay of Plenty. The airport handles regional traffic and looks the part. A low terminal building, a handful of check-in desks, a compact apron. Nothing about its appearance suggests that something here is fundamentally unlike anywhere else on Earth. But it is. A live KiwiRail freight line crosses the main runway, not a ceremonial remnant, not a heritage display, an operating railway used by working freight trains on a regular schedule. The explanation is straightforward, even if the result is not. The tracks came first. Rail infrastructure was laid through this corridor in the early 20th century, long before aviation had any foothold in the region. When a runway eventually became necessary, the available land and the local topography left little room for negotiation. The strip went where the ground allowed. The crossing was the price of that compromise, and it was never engineered away. The coordination required today is exact and non-negotiable. Before every takeoff or landing, air traffic control must confirm the tracks are clear. A train approaching means the aircraft holds its position. A taxiing plane means rail traffic stops. Two forms of transport, each requiring hundreds of meters to halt, take turns on the same patch of sealed ground. What places Gisborne at number 13 is not danger dressed up in dramatic scenery. There is no cliff edge here, no ocean spray, no mountain backdrop lending the scene its weight. There is a freight train moving slowly across a runway while a turboprop pilot sits on the brakes and waits. The machinery of two entirely separate transport systems, built in different eras for different purposes, meeting without ceremony on a strip of New Zealand concrete. The sheer ordinariness of it is the point, and this list is only getting started. Twice a day, this airport ceases to exist. Not metaphorically, the Atlantic Ocean physically swallows it whole, covers it completely, and then retreats to let it function again. That is the operating reality of Barra Airport, number 12 on this list, and arguably the strangest functional piece of aviation infrastructure on the planet. The island of Barra sits off the west coast of Scotland, roughly 90 square kilometres of land with around 1,100 people living on it. Getting there by sea is slow and weather-dependent. Air access isn't a convenience, it's the supply chain. Mail, medicine, workers commuting between the island and the mainland all move through this airport. Except there is no airport in the conventional sense. There are no runways. What Loganair's Twin Otter aircraft land on is Trivor Beach, and the scheduling authority isn't an air traffic control tower, it's a published tide table. The beach offers 3 usable strips, marked with flagged poles pressed into cockleshell sand. When the tide comes in, those markers go underwater. When it pulls back, a ground crew walks out with boots and brushes, clears seaweed, checks the surface for softness, and resets the markers. Then the flights resume. The same stretch of sand that served as a runway an hour ago might have families walking dogs on it when the schedule permits. The boundary between aerodrome and public beach is nominal at best. Barra Airport is not a historical curiosity or a temporary workaround that was never updated. It operates today under the same tidal logic it always has. The ocean here isn't a problem that engineering solved. It's an active participant in every single operation. That arrangement works because the island is small and the flights are few. The airport ranked next on this list, Kansai, took the opposite approach. Instead of working around the sea, engineers built an island in the middle of it, and it has been slowly sinking ever since. An airport that sinks a little more every single day and still keeps operating. That is not a metaphor. That is the daily engineering reality of Kansai International Airport, number 11 on this list, built on an artificial island in Osaka Bay, Japan. The island does not sit on bedrock, it sits on soft seabed clay, and it has been slowly compressing under the weight of everything placed on top of it since construction began in the late 1980s. The original projections were already alarming by any normal standard. Engineers expected the ground to subside by roughly 8 meters over several decades. What actually happened was that the island sank more than 8 meters in just the first few years, before the airport even opened in 1994. By the 2000s, total subsidence at certain points had exceeded 11 meters. The reason this has not destroyed the airport is a system of thousands of individually adjustable hydraulic jacks embedded beneath the floor of the terminal. Architect Renzo Piano designed the building, a 700-meter undulating wave of steel and glass, with this mechanical intervention built directly into its bones. Airport engineers continuously raise and re-level sections of the structure to compensate for the uneven settling of the ground below. This is not maintenance, it is a permanent condition of existence. The island covers approximately 510 hectares and was assembled by dumping millions of cubic meters of fill material directly into the bay. A project that ranks among the most ambitious land reclamation efforts in history. And every kilogram of that fill is still pressing downward. In 2018, Typhoon Jebi demonstrated what happens when the sea decides to push back. Floodwater swept across parts of the island. A tanker broke free from its moorings and smashed into the bridge connecting the airport to the mainland, and thousands of passengers found themselves stranded with no way out. Kansai International Airport is proof that human ingenuity can build almost anything, anywhere. It is also a daily reminder that some arguments with nature never fully end. Next, an airport where the obstacle is not water below, but sheer rock faces on every side. A 4-lane highway runs straight through the middle of an active airport runway. That is not a metaphor, not a historical quirk that was corrected decades ago. It is happening today, multiple times a day, at Gibraltar Airport, ranked 10th among the most extraordinary airports on Earth. Every time a plane prepares to land or take off at North Front, as the airport is also known, the traffic lights on Winston Churchill Avenue turn red, barriers descend across the road, and everything stops. Cars, pedestrians, delivery vans, all of them wait while a commercial aircraft rolls across the tarmac they were just driving on. The reason this arrangement exists comes down to one brutal geographic fact. Gibraltar covers roughly 6.5 square kilometers, wedged between a near vertical rock face and the sea. When the territory needed an airport, there was precisely one flat piece of land available, the narrow isthmus connecting Gibraltar to mainland Spain. And that same isthmus already carried the only road linking Gibraltar to the Spanish border town of La Línea. There was no room to separate them, so they were never separated. The constraints do not end with the road crossing. The runway stretches approximately 1,800 meters, and both ends terminate at the water's edge, leaving pilots with no margin for error on approach or departure. The rock itself, rising to nearly 430 meters, deflects wind in unpredictable directions, producing crosswinds and turbulence that demand exceptional precision on every single operation. Landing here is less a routine procedure and more a carefully negotiated passage between geography, weather, and urban infrastructure. Discussions about a tunnel beneath the runway have gained traction in recent years, and some preliminary work has begun, which could eventually remove the road crossing from the equation. For now, though, Gibraltar Airport remains the one place on the planet where a stoplight stands between you and a taxiing aircraft. Number 9 on our list is a runway that runs out of island before it runs out of asphalt. Agatti Airport in India's Lakshadweep archipelago has just 1,150 meters of tarmac, stretching almost the full length of an island that is barely 600 meters wide at its broadest point. Both ends of the runway terminate within a few dozen meters of open ocean. There is no overrun area worth mentioning. There is no second chance once a pilot commits to landing. To understand why this airport exists at all, you need to understand the geography it was built to solve. Lakshadweep is a scattered group of 36 coral islands sitting in the Arabian Sea, roughly 220 kilometers off the coast of the Indian state of Kerala. The vast majority of those islands are uninhabited. The ones that do have permanent populations are effectively cut off from the mainland during rough weather. No bridges connect them to anything. Ferry services become unreliable when swells rise, and the horizon in every direction is nothing but water. Agatti, with a coastline of just over 5 kilometers, is the only island in the entire archipelago with an airport. That single fact concentrates an enormous amount of pressure onto one very short strip of concrete. The approach procedure here is what earns Agatti its place on this list. Pilots descend entirely over water, which strips away the usual visual references that help calibrate height and distance above ground. What they see ahead is a narrow grey ribbon flanked on all sides by deep blue. The ocean beneath the final approach path drops to hundreds of meters in depth, almost immediately beyond the shoreline. A misjudged glide path does not result in a hard landing on extended runway. It results in the aircraft entering the water before reaching the threshold. For the aircraft that serve this route, mostly ATR turboprops operated by regional carriers, the strip is considered operationally marginal even under normal conditions. Tropical humidity reduces engine thrust. Sea wind shifts direction unpredictably. Each of these factors eats into margins that are already paper-thin. 12,000 people live on Agatti, and when weather closes the sea lanes, this airport is their only physical connection to the rest of India. Engineering built it to serve them. Physics has made it one of the most demanding strips in the world. Our next entry will show that high-stakes landings are not exclusively a coastal phenomenon. Every single summer, jet engines blast sunbathers off their feet on a Greek beach, and nobody considers shutting the airport down. That is Skiathos in one sentence. Ranked 8th on our list, Skiathos Airport Alexander Papadiamantis sits on a tiny Aegean island where the terrain left engineers almost no room to work with. The single runway stretches less than 1,500 meters, a number that sits well below the standard comfort zone for commercial jet operations. Yet scheduled jets land and depart here throughout the peak season without interruption. The paradox deepens when you look at the runway threshold. There is no perimeter fence, no buffer zone, no signage telling people to step back. There is just the big banana strip of Kerrier Beach, a row of sun lounges, and an approach path that brings aircraft over the sand at roughly 10 to 15 meters of altitude. Plane spotters travel from across Europe specifically to stand on that beach and photograph the moment when a jet's landing gear hangs directly above a crowd of swimmers. The images look altered. They are not. Departures, however, are where skiathos stops being a spectacle and starts being a physical event. When a jet accelerates down that short strip and pitches toward the sea, the exhaust plume rolls back over the beach with enough force to knock adults off their feet, strip towels from bodies, and send belongings airborne. Multiple documented incidents confirm this is not anecdote. The comparison that always comes up is Princess Juliana Airport in St. Martin, the long-established icon of beach runway proximity. St. Martin has been engineered into a tourist attraction. Skiathos still feels like a geography problem that was never fully solved. That unresolved tension between Resort Island and operational jet airport is precisely why it earns the 8th spot. Ahead of us are places where the airports themselves seem to defy the basic logic of how structures should exist. There are roughly 20 people on Earth who are allowed to land here. Not 20 airlines, not 20 crews, 20 individual pilots. That single fact tells you everything about Paro Airport in Bhutan, ranked 7th among the world's most extreme airports. Commercial aviation reached this deep Himalayan valley in 1983, and it has never quite made peace with the geography. The valley of the Paro River sits above 2,200 meters, locked between mountain ridges that climb past 5,500 meters on both sides. The air is thin, the space is narrow, and the terrain is entirely unforgiving. The core problem is not altitude, though altitude matters, it is the approach. Standard instrument landing systems cannot function here. The surrounding peaks physically block the signal geometry that modern aviation depends on. Every approach into Paro is flown by hand, visually, with the pilot reading specific mountain summits as waypoints and cutting tight angles between rock walls at jet speed. The margins to the ridgelines can be measured in hundreds of meters and sometimes less. On the final turn before touchdown, the runway is not visible at all. Passengers see only slopes and open sky until the last few seconds of flight. The International Civil Aviation Organization responded by creating a dedicated, special certification for this route. Each of the 20 qualified pilots has completed a training program built around the specific topography of this one valley. Remove that pilot from the cockpit and the flight does not depart, regardless of weather or schedule. Thin air at this elevation reduces lift and raises the minimum speed required for takeoff. Weather can close the valley in minutes. Cloud cover arrives fast, and the airport offers no instrument alternative. Operations are daylight only. There are no night flights, and there will not be. Every single landing at Paro is, by definition, a precision event, performed at the boundary of what certified aviation permits. The shortest commercial runway on Earth doesn't belong to some remote jungle airstrip or a forgotten Cold War outpost. It sits on a Caribbean island that receives regular scheduled flights. Wancho e Yorosca Airport on the island of Saba measures just 400 meters of usable pavement, earning its Guinness World Record not as a relic of aviation history, but as an active, functioning gateway to a populated community. That's 1/3 the length of a standard regional runway. The reason this exists at all comes down to pure geology. Saba is not a tropical island in any conventional sense. It is an extinct volcanic cone rising almost vertically from the sea, with sheer cliffs on every side and no flat ground anywhere on its surface. When engineers were tasked with building an airport here in 1963, they were not choosing between good options and better ones. They were solving an equation with almost no solution. The result is a runway where 3 of the 4 ends drop straight into the ocean from cliff edges dozens of meters high. The 4th end meets the mountain. There is no go-around procedure in any practical sense. Once a pilot commits to the approach is all there is. Only specially certified piston and turboprop aircraft, most notably the de Havilland Twin Otter, are permitted to operate here. Larger regional jets simply cannot generate the lift or decelerate within the available distance. Pilots must complete specific additional training before receiving clearance for Saba. Atlantic crosswinds are persistent and unpredictable, and the visual cues over a cliff edge actively work against a pilot's spatial perception, even for those with thousands of flight hours. The airport remains open and essential. Ferry connections to neighbouring islands are unreliable and weather-dependent, which means the 1,700 residents of Saba depend on those 400 metres as their primary, consistent link to the outside world. Number 6 on our list is where infrastructure bends the rules of aviation. Number 5 is where the rules of human endurance take over, and only about 20 pilots on Earth qualify. Number 5 on our list should not exist. That's not a figure of speech. It is a straightforward engineering impossibility that happens anyway, every single year, in one of the most remote corners of the planet. The McMurdo Ice Runway in Antarctica is a fully operational military airfield built entirely on frozen seawater. There is no asphalt, no concrete, no foundation of any kind. The runway surface is approximately 2 meters of sea ice, and beneath it, hundreds of meters of open ocean. Every Antarctic season, US military engineers walk out onto the Ross Sea near McMurdo Station and build this runway from scratch. They grade the surface, drill dozens of measurement points to verify ice thickness, install navigation equipment, and certify the strip for heavy aircraft operations, all with the knowledge that the entire structure will melt and vanish within months. The aircraft using this runway are not small. C-17 Globemasters, among the largest military transport planes in the world, with a maximum takeoff weight of around 260 tons, land here routinely. Pilots and crew who have flown this route consistently describe the same striking detail. As the aircraft rolls down the strip, the ice visibly flexes beneath the landing gear, rippling outward in slow waves, like pressure moving through a vast sheet of frozen jelly. This is not a visual trick. The mass of the aircraft is transferring force into the ice, which deforms elastically and then recovers. The ocean is directly below. Operations are permitted only during the narrow Antarctic summer window, and only within strict temperature limits. When surface temperatures rise above the threshold, flights stop immediately. Softened ice cannot bear the load. Every kilogram of supplies reaching McMurdo Station, which supports up to 1,000 personnel through the winter, depends on those few operational months. The runway is rebuilt every year without exception, used for a season, and surrendered back to the sea. If number 5 is a runway floating on the ocean, number 4 at least stands on solid ground. The problem there is that the ground itself is the danger. At Tenzing Hillary Airport in Lukla, Nepal, a go-around is not a procedure pilots choose to skip. It is a physical impossibility. Mountains seal one end of the valley, a 700-meter cliff drops away at the other, and the corridor between them is too narrow to turn an aircraft around. Every approach is final. That single constraint makes Lukla number 4 on our list, unlike anything else in commercial aviation. The airport sits at nearly 2,860 meters above sea level, tucked into a tight Himalayan gorge in the foothills northeast of Kathmandu. The runway is 527 meters long, a fraction of what a standard airport offers, and it is not level. It slopes at roughly 12%, one end measurably higher than the other. Incoming aircraft climb that gradient on touchdown, using the uphill angle as a brake. Departing aircraft roll downhill, building speed, and launch off the edge into the void above the Dudkoshi River Gorge. At the mountain end of the strip, a stone wall marks where the usable surface ends. All of this happens without radar and without instrument approach systems. Visibility in the gorge can collapse within minutes as cloud rolls in from the surrounding peaks, and when it does, operations stop. Pilots read the terrain with their eyes alone, which makes weather not an inconvenience, but a hard operational boundary. What gives Lukla its particular weight in this list is that it is not obscure. This is the primary gateway to Everest. Thousands of trekkers and climbers pass through every season, sustaining a high volume of daily movements. The risk is not theoretical, and the traffic is not thin. The physics are extreme, and the schedule is busy, and those two things coexist here every single day. Further along our list, number 3 introduces a runway that does not merely challenge pilots with slope or altitude. It ceases to exist for most of the year, and when it does appear, it floats. An international airport that forces wide-body jets to fly over sunbathers at rooftop height sounds like a planning catastrophe. It is not. It is geography. Princess Juliana International Airport, ranked number 3 on our list, sits on the Dutch side of St. Martin, a Caribbean island split between France and the Netherlands, and its single runway has almost no room to exist. Measuring just 2,280 meters, it is pinned between a hillside at one end and a bay at the other. There is no option to extend the approach path, no way to raise the glide slope. Aircraft simply must cross Maho Beach to land, and they cross it low, between 10 and 15 meters above the sand, with landing gear passing mere feet over the heads of people standing at the perimeter fence. Boeing 747s and Airbus A330s, the heaviest commercial aircraft in regular service, conduct this passage multiple times daily. The result is the most photographed airport on Earth, a place where tourists specifically travel to stand in the jet blast and feel the physics of aviation in their bones. That last detail carries a warning. Departing aircraft fire their engines toward the beach, producing a wall of thrust powerful enough to throw a person off their feet. The fence at the runway threshold has become a grip point for thrill seekers clinging to the links to resist the force. Documented injuries are numerous. In 2017, a woman died after being thrown to the ground by the blast wave of a departing jet. The spectacle is real, so is the danger. For pilots, Princess Juliana offers no margin for lateral error on approach. Precision is not preferred here. It is mandatory. The drama of low altitude and human proximity defines this airport entirely. The next entry on our list achieves a very different kind of dread. Madeira Airport shouldn't exist, not in the form it takes today, and arguably not at all, because the island it serves was built by geology with a single apparent purpose: to prevent anything flat from forming. Madeira rose from the Atlantic as a volcanic mass, all steep basalt cliffs and ridgelines that leave engineers almost nowhere to work. When the airport at Funchal opened in 1958, it occupied a narrow volcanic headland wedged between the ocean and a wall of mountains. The runway was short by necessity, not design choice. Pilots who flew in during those early years understood the arithmetic immediately. Limited space, unpredictable wind, no room to recover from a mistake. The Atlantic doesn't offer second approaches. The wind is the constant variable. It comes off the ocean without pattern, bends around the mountain ridges, and enters the approach corridor carrying lateral components that shift without warning. Turbulence within a few kilometers of the runway threshold was capable of displacing an aircraft from the glide path entirely. For propeller aircraft, it was manageable, if only just. For the jet age, the original runway length was simply insufficient. What the engineers produced in response had no equivalent anywhere in European aviation. With land exhausted and the Atlantic beginning, they extended the runway over the water. More than 200 concrete columns were driven into the seabed to support a platform stretching roughly 1,100 meters out from the shore. The result is a runway that is also a bridge, with waves moving underneath and open ocean on both sides offering no deflection from crosswinds whatsoever. The operational consequences were structural and lasting. Airlines were required, not advised, required to certify their captains through training programs designed specifically for Funchal. The designation of Madeira as the most technically demanding approach in Europe held for decades. It is ranked second among the continent's most extreme airports. Second, because somewhere else, every one of these factors, the wind, the terrain, the complete absence of recovery margin, converges at a single point. At nearly 3,000 meters above sea level, there is a commercial airport where a go-around is physically impossible. Not difficult, not inadvisable, impossible. In front of you is a mountain wall. Behind you is a 700-meter cliff. That airport is Tenzing Hillary in Lukla, Nepal, and it sits at number 1 on our list for exactly that reason. Every dangerous variable we have examined across this entire ranking converges here and reaches its absolute ceiling. Lukla lies at 2,860 meters above sea level in the Khumbu region of the Himalayas. Its runway stretches 527 meters, already short by any standard, but the number that truly defines this strip is 12%. That is the gradient of the slope. One end of the runway sits noticeably higher than the other, which means aircraft land uphill and take off downhill, using gravity as a structural part of the operation. The lower end drops away into the Dudkosi River gorge below. The upper end meets bare rock. There is no radar, there is no instrument approach procedure. Every landing and departure operates under visual flight rules alone, which means that when cloud fills the valley, and it can do so within minutes with no reliable forecast, the airport simply closes. Pilots get one attempt. There is no second pass. Tenzing Hillary was built in 1964, not by an engineering firm, but by the villagers themselves, driven by the initiative of Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest. The airport took its present name in 2008, honouring both Hillary and his climbing partner Tenzing Norgay. It exists because it has to. This is the sole entry point to Everest Base Camp, and no viable alternative route exists. That necessity is precisely what makes the statistics so sobering. Tenzing Hillary holds the worst accident record of any civilian aerodrome on the planet. First place on this list was never in question. Only 20 pilots in the entire world are certified to land at Paro Airport. Not 20,000, 20. That single fact tells you everything about what this list is. 13 airports where the engineering required to make flight possible is so extreme, so precise, so defiant of common sense that most of the planet's pilots simply aren't qualified to use them. Gisborne in New Zealand shares its single runway with an active railway line. A locomotive and a Boeing need a schedule and a traffic light to avoid occupying the same strip of tarmac at the same time. Barra in Scotland uses a tidal beach as all 3 of its runways, which means twice a day the entire airport is underwater. Kansai was built on an artificial island in Osaka Bay that has been sinking ever since construction finished, and it continues to sink now under full international operation. Gibraltar's main road crosses the runway. Cars stop for planes, planes wait for cars, and somehow this works. Agatti is a coral atoll where the piste ends at the waterline with no buffer and no alternative. Skiathos produces a jet blast so violent that tourists grip a fence to feel it and call it entertainment. Saba offers 400 meters of asphalt flanked by cliffs and ocean. McMurdo operates on sea ice with the actual ocean a few meters below the surface. Lukla has a cliff at one end, a mountain at the other, and a slope between them that makes go-arounds impossible. St. Martin's Maho Beach and Madeira's Cliff Edge platform complete the 13. Every one of these places exists because human will refused to accept that geography had the final word. It hasn't. Not yet. If this video made you see a normal airport differently, like it. If you want to know what else aviation is hiding, subscribe. The next list is already waiting.